Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be looking at the market cycle ROI, where we currently stand and where we could be going. We're going to be looking at a bullish scenario, a bearish scenario, and maybe a more practical scenario. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So the market cycle ROI is one of the things we do to measure the cycle ROI from the bottom. Okay, so we have these major Bitcoin corrections with these elongated bear markets and accumulation phases, and we just do this exercise where we say, okay, well, what if we measure the ROI as measured from market cycle bottom? And for those of you who think that the halving is a more realistic place to look, well, we actually put out a video on that a few weeks ago as well, so I would encourage you to go check out that video too, which gives a slightly different perspective, but more or less the same thing. Now, we're looking at the market cycle ROI of Bitcoin from market cycle bottom. This is cycle 1, and if we take a look at cycle 2, we can see that it took a little bit longer for it to reach its cycle peak. Now, of course, when you consider this, we have to explain the caveat here is that some people might assume that this blue line and the orange line are part of the same market cycle. Okay, so that might be the one assumption that we're making, is that we're saying that these are two separate market cycles. Okay, so cycle 1, cycle 2. Cycle 1 peaked at under 300 days. This one peaked at less than 800 days. So when we pull up cycle 3, it really comes as no surprise that we're seeing the returns from each market cycle drop down. Okay, and I think this makes sense, because if you think about it from a pragmatic point of view, it takes a lot more volume to move the market cap as you continue to go up each 10x, right? This is why altcoins it's so much easier to have them move 100x than it is for Bitcoin. You know, if Bitcoin does 100x, it's going to take years. For an altcoin to do it, it can sometimes do it in a long weekend. Okay, and the reason is because you have to look at the market cap. If the altcoin, if your pet project that you're shilling to all your friends has a market cap of, say, $5 million, then for it to get to a market capitalization of 50 million, it's not going to take nearly as much volume as it would for, say, Bitcoin to go from a market capitalization from 1 trillion to, say, 10 trillion. Okay, right now it's around the $1 trillion mark. $10 trillion would be a 10x from here, essentially. That's a lot, right? I mean, that would be looking at over $100,000 or $500,000 Bitcoin. So a $500-something thousand Bitcoin would get us to that $10 trillion market capitalization. But we also know that it is a function of the supply, and the supply of Bitcoin is ever changing right now. So we look at this and we say, well, from a pragmatic point of view, it would make sense why the cycle ROI is decreasing. Now, you might look at this and say, well, cycle 2 isn't that diminished from cycle 1, and I would agree. However, there were some wicks on cycle 1 that actually went a lot lower, and had we included those, this ROI would have gone even higher. However, I don't want to cherry pick the data. We're just taking daily closes, and this is what you get. The cycle 1 ROI, as measured from market cycle bottom, and note that this is a logarithmic scale, so this is 1, 10, 100, and 1,000. So this would be 200, 300, 400, 500. This was a 600x compared to closer to a 500x compared to a, say, 100x. Okay, so we look at this and we say, well, from a pragmatic point of view, it makes sense that the cycle ROI would diminish from each market cycle bottom, because it will take exponentially more volume to move the market cap another 10x. And if you think about it, the market capitalization of gold is only approximately another 10x from where Bitcoin currently is. So it's going to be harder and harder for Bitcoin to put in 10x's, as long as you're later in the cycle, right? So the chances that Bitcoin this market cycle goes up another 10x is relatively low. But when we were at our cycle bottom, and even when we hit $3,800 back in March, we said, okay, well, the chances that you could see a 10x from here are relatively high, because you're looking at a $4,000 Bitcoin. We would project the price of Bitcoin will make it to the six-figure region this market cycle. Therefore, you're looking at over a 10x. I mean, you could be looking at a 25x or more potentially whenever we do reach the theoretical market cycle top. Of course, this is not financial advice. We're just using the data to paint the picture. So then we say, well, where are we currently? and we pull up cycle 4. Okay, now I'm a fairly large proponent that this cycle will peak at a later date, as if you normalize it to market cycle bottom, than the last cycle. However, given the current market conditions, obviously that's not a very popular theory, considering that we've gone well above where we were from the last cycle at this point. So currently we're looking at just below a 20x, maybe about a 16x or so from the bottom. If you look at daily closes, remember we're not even considering $3,800 as the bottom. We're considering wherever it closed on the daily time frame, which was probably about $1,000 or more over the $3,800 mark, because it pretty quickly moved back up. So we're looking at less than a 20x so far as measured from market cycle bottom when considering the daily closes, which is actually ahead of where we were last cycle, and not just by a little bit. By the time we were at this point last cycle, in fact, we were only looking at, this is say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe a 6x. So we're well ahead of where we were last market cycle. However, we do know we're coming into that phase of the last cycle where it did continue to go on a fairly impressive move up over several months in a row. So we can see that it would quickly catch up to where we currently are if Bitcoin is unable to continue to put in new highs here in the next month or two. You can see that after this major move, which still doesn't even, it comes sort of where we are today, Bitcoin then had a 40% correction, but then it quickly continued on. So in order for Bitcoin to stay on track with the last cycle, we do need to continue moving up. However, we do have a few months of leeway, right? We don't even need to move up immediately. We could chill for the next, say, 3 months or so and still be doing relatively well compared to the last market cycle. Okay, this is all compared to the last market cycle. We would still be ahead of schedule. So I've seen a lot of people get very impatient with where things are. If you look at what Bitcoin has done over the last 6 months, it basically makes the last market cycle, at least some of these other runs we saw last market cycle, especially earlier on, look like a joke to some degree. Okay, I mean, this has been mostly just a straight move up with very little time to look back and see what we've even done. Okay, so I would say that patience is probably the best thing that you can have, right? Patience would probably be the best thing that you can have at this point. Yes, there could come fairly substantial corrections. We could see 30-40% corrections. We could even see larger corrections than that. But I don't think it necessarily means that would be the end of the market cycle, because we can see that based on what we've done in the past, it would stand to reason that we could have a long way to go. So the most bullish scenario, which is what a lot of other, say, influencers in the space are discussing, would be a $300,000 Bitcoin maybe by the end of the year. Well, where do they get this number? Well, I think they're essentially looking at a 100x move from the bottom. Okay, so if you get a 100x move from the bottom, you're looking at approximately a $300,000 Bitcoin. And by the way, when I was talking about the bottom earlier, I was talking about 3,800. I was actually thinking of the March bottom, but that's actually not what this one is of. It's actually the December 2018 bottom. But even then, it still isn't going to be the exact bottom, because we know that it moved up a few $100 or so, maybe $100 or so from where the wick was to where actually the daily close was. So we're looking at this and we say, well, this is what a lot of people are saying will happen, is a $300,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year. And given Bitcoin's recent price movements, it's led a lot of people to believe it would actually happen sooner than that. And a lot of people are saying even by this summer, we'll see a $300,000 Bitcoin. Now, while I would contend that anything is possible, I do want people to manage their expectations and to recognize that, at least in the past, anytime we put in a cycle peak, it was actually further out than the last market cycle. This is another reason why I want to stress to people that actually time is on our side. And that yes, we could have major corrections along the way. We're having a cool down phase now, but so far time is on our side. Now, if we were to continue moving up, and let's say we were to go up to a 70x ROI before, by the 1,000-day mark, then I might start to say, okay, well, maybe time's not on our side anymore. And maybe we're getting to the point where this cycle is getting too overheated. It moved up quicker than I anticipated, and then maybe it comes down sooner. But in order for us to do that, for us to get to say a 70x, we would need to see over $200,000 Bitcoin over, say, the next half year or so. Okay, and if we don't see that, then there's a good chance that we're not going to stay on pace with the last market cycle. So when you see people talking about, say, a $300,000 Bitcoin, they're sort of assuming that it's going to do 100x from the bottom, and it would basically have to emulate the last market cycle to do so by the end of December. Or if it wanted to go, if it did it even faster, which is what a lot of people are calling for, then they're essentially saying it's going to go to some of these levels by this summer. So this would be the most bullish scenario. The most bearish scenario would just be that this was a cycle, a crazy cycle that just took us completely off guard, had a very quick pump here in 2019 and then back down, and then another pump in 2020 and early 2021, and then back down. So this would be the most bearish scenario where this could be the end of the market cycle. Now, I don't think this is the case. I'm just presenting the various options and not present what I think is the more likely scenario. So you have the most bullish scenario, which is what most influencers will tell you will happen. You have the most bearish scenario, which is what most influencers will not tell you will happen. And I don't actually think this will happen either, but of course anything's possible. And then I would say, well, we have a more practical scenario where we could continue to identify the fact that just because we're ahead of schedule now doesn't mean we'll stay ahead of schedule when compared to the last market cycle. As I've said before, there was a phase where we've been ahead of cycle 2 and we did not hold it. There was also a phase when this cycle was ahead of cycle 1 and it did not hold it. There was a phase when cycle 2 was keeping pace with cycle 1, but ultimately was not able to keep pace. And there was also a phase when cycle 3 at the very beginning was ahead of cycle 1, but was not ultimately able to keep pace. So we say that, yeah, we're ahead of schedule. This is great. Lots of people are happy. Lots of people have made a lot of money, and they're counting all the ways they're going to spend it. But when if we look at the grand scheme of, say, the market cycle, while it is possible that we continue moving up in the short term and rival the last market cycle, I also want people to take a step back and say, well, a more practical solution could be, well, maybe we don't stay ahead of cycle 3 for the duration of the entire market cycle. Now, again, this is not going to be the most popular theory right now, because I also claimed the same thing a few months ago when we were at this level, and it did not preclude us from continuing to move up and get even further ahead of the last market cycle. I think the only thing we can do at this point is we look at the most bullish scenario, we look at the most bearish scenario. So the most bullish would say is what a lot of people are calling for, maybe a $300,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year. I think this is a little bit too optimistic just because of the amount of capital that it's needed to sustain that. This would be a more bearish scenario where we're saying, okay, the cycle's over, go home, we'll pick back up later on. Don't really think that's going to happen either. I would say a more practical scenario would be something like this, where even if we move up in the short term, as long as we're not going to $300,000, we're still not putting in the same types of gains we saw from last market cycle. So this is what I would say to look for. Obviously, what I drew here is not going to happen because this was just a random drawing that I took about 2.5 seconds to draw. But the idea, generally speaking, is that even if we don't drop down, even if we just went sideways for a few months, we would ultimately not keep pace with the prior market cycle. Hopefully this video is informative to you in terms of understanding the different theories, where we're headed, why some people think we're going to go to $300,000 in short order, why other people think it's going to take longer, and that we could cool off for a while before trending higher. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let's go for 300,000 subscribers. Give the video a thumbs up. Check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Remember, we also have the premium list altcoin season sale. If you want access to that before the prices go up, make sure you check it out in the description below. You'll get access to the weekly reports, the weekly premium videos, the Telegram alerts channel, the Telegram chat room, the risk dashboard, the Into the Cryptoverse app, the trading view indicators, the premium only live streams, and more. Make sure you guys check it out before the prices go up. I will give out a date here in the next couple days as to when that sale is going to end so that you guys are aware. But the sale will end very soon. I was just out of town actually for the last few days. Back in town now. We'll try to wrap that sale up here in fairly short order, but I just want to give people one last chance to sign up. So make sure you guys subscribe to the channel at the very least. Thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you next time. Bye.